to EMS at Sea Level. I'm here today with Pamela Gordon. Pamela Gordon is my go-to person for all things sustainable, all things green. But actually that comes from a place with a huge knowledge of the EMS industry and the manufacturing space. I think when we first met, Pam, we were probably at one of your tech forecasters quarterly forums with the great and the good of the EMS industry, and that might have been in the early noughties or even the late 90s. Tell me a bit about, give me a short introduction to yourself and where you are now with Presidio and what you're currently doing.
Absolutely, Phil. Always good to talk to you. So I work for Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco, which is 100% sustainability at the core of every single course we teach. And it's ideal for me because, as you said, back in the 90s, and actually, to be truthful, the late 80s, already I had started a consultancy called Technology Forecasters, which looked very much at supply chain responsibility, efficiency. And then I wrote a book about 10 years after that called Lean and Green, Profit for Your Workplace and the Environment, to look at the sustainability side of supply chain and electronics design and so forth. So that brings us here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's really interesting. And I know sustainability in terms of where it sits on people's agenda tends to ebb and flow. And I think what's really interesting at the moment is, you know, we saw a side effect with respect to pollution of what was going on in China initially. And I remember seeing photos from NASA of the sky being clearer than it had ever been before, and some amazing impacts. But my concern was suddenly we get to this very urgent crisis of dealing with, you know, real human need, and obviously with respect to manufacturing, with some really important commercial needs. And I wonder if sustainability gets pushed back down the agenda, or whether people are thinking, here's an opportunity to reset, let's keep sustainability on the agenda as a result of that. What do you see?
Well, remember that sustainability means also sustaining the economy. So it's all sustainability. We can choose to revert to the way it was before the coronavirus, where we had numerous interruptions of supply chain over, be it volcanoes or political strife or environmental occurrences or disease, right? Or we could actually reset to a more resilient supply chain, which looks at more local manufacturing. It looks at reducing transportation. It looks at design for the circular economy so that materials aren't just in the trash. So this is our opportunity to do that reset toward resilience for the sustainability both of industry and the environment.
Yeah, and I think it's what I think is really fascinating, and I've spoken to a whole group of EMS CEOs on the topic of what the new normal might look like, and they do see that reset in the supply chain, and they see certain elements in there. And you talked about resilience; that's the word on everybody's lips at the moment. But that's accompanied by agility and adaptability, because they know they need to be able to move and respond to a crisis. They've done their best in this one. They know the next one will come, but they don't know what it will be. So you've got to plan for the unknown. So we're seeing that challenge between, you know, resilience on one side and the kind of robust supply chain, agility on the other side. We're seeing dynamics in terms of politics where people are saying, well, hey, we need to reduce our dependency on China or on specific locations. There's the economic demand to bring jobs back. So we've got to somehow redesign our manufacturing model and our ideals. How can we do that and take into account not just sustainability in terms of business models, but sustainability in terms of environmental impact?
Well, Phil, I agree with everything you said except one. No, we're not waiting for the next crisis. We're in a crisis. We are in a crisis right now globally, where the temperatures are of an increase that is affecting supply chain, workers, shipments, possibilities of consumers living a good life so that they can afford the products we want to sell them. We are in a crisis. And I think what COVID has taught us is that we can find the money and we can move very quickly. We can change behavior like that. So there's no excuses. We need to bolster up and do this right now, forevermore. It's interesting, you said before, and I've heard many people say, well, sustainability, sometimes it's in vogue and sometimes not. This is forever. This is forever because the planet right now is responding by telling us we've put enough emissions in already and that now we need to do it. But the beauty is that everything that's good for the agility you mentioned in supply chain is all good to reduce our carbon input. Decarbonizing our supply chain is mainly about making things local, using 3D manufacturing when possible, and the circular economy.
Yeah. So when you look at that, and I absolutely agree with you using 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and that idea of distributed manufacturing footprints where it's very close to the consumer. I think that's very exciting. I think a lot of people are talking about, when they're talking about changing supply chain, they see automation as an opportunity there, and kind of software-led robotics that are very flexible and very adaptable. What do you think the barriers are to people, like companies that are in supply chain management, whether they're on the purchase side or on the sales side? What are the barriers to them actually moving forward with a more sustainable approach? What slows them down?
What slows them down is that we've been applying automation to making things. It's well past the time that we need to be masterful at using automation to deconstruct and use things again.
Okay.
That is the mindset. If we always think of ourselves as supply chain, we have to break that old concept that the origination is mining or manufacturing something newly. Instead, we have to look at the amazing wealthy resources that have already been in products that exist. Yeah. The clean tech revolution, the companies I'm seeing, both who are working with our college and clients that we have, is phenomenal. There's no going back. We are looking at ourselves as supply forward, looking at how to take what we've already done and make it economically profitable for us forevermore.
And does that have to happen at the very offset? Does that have to happen at the design stage? So you're designing a product, you're thinking this is its first life, but you have to think of its afterlife, or is it design using more recyclable materials, more materials development? What are the keys to creating that circular economy, particularly in the industry we know, electronic manufacturing?
Phil, when you and I first met, you probably heard me say something like this to the quarterly forum, that 80% of a product's impact is decided at the design phase. And that's still true, but now I say it differently. 80% of the impact is in the brains of the executive team.
Right. Yeah.
Because we can have really smart, creative engineers designing circular economy and reuse and recycling from the very start. But if they're not supported and rewarded by the people who they report to, it's not going to gain momentum. Yeah. I've found that executives really get the circular economy in about 5 minutes, but it has to be explained, and then they get it. So we need to transition from the very top. And for the EMS companies, it means not only the top of their organizations, the folks you interview, their customers, C-suite, they have to get it.
Yeah, and as you say, I think one of the challenges is the reward system that's in place at the supply chain side. So, we always look at supply chain management, and it turns out that most supply chain managers are rewarded on how many points they can knock off their purchase price in a quarter. And actually that doesn't necessarily even deliver on bottom line results because it doesn't take into account resilience, it doesn't take into account corporate and social responsibility and all those things that have costs further down the line. How do you, and as an organization at the moment, but generally, how do you communicate firstly to companies what they need to do on both sides of the equation, but also how do you get government and those kind of authoritative bodies involved?
Yeah, our philosophy at Presidio Graduate School is really the public-private partnership. And it's hard to say without putting out a lot of P's, but essentially that's what it is, because it's no longer siloed, it's together. We have a degree called the Masters of Public Administration, as well as the Masters of Business Administration. But you asked me what I'm doing. So I'll just say we have a consultancy within the college that's very much like Technology Forecasters was. It's called PGS Consults. And it's our faculty and alumni showing these top executives what is the new circular economy? What is this old supply chain method that, if they've noticed, isn't working as well anymore? And that's key.
Yeah, and actually you mentioned those private-public partnerships, and I think they are fascinating, and we've seen numerous examples of those recently. The most recent, which I was fascinated by, not from a technology point of view, but from a partnership point of view, was SpaceX and NASA. You know, the fact that the private sector is now re-energizing the space race, I think that's absolutely fascinating. But also the way the public and private sector have worked together through the COVID crisis, and you know how they figured out how to make more ventilators, how to get more PPE to where it needs to be. So I think that's fascinating, and it actually shows what can be done when people collaborate and work together. Do you think there is enough willingness, and do you think it's high enough on the agenda of governments, or is it, you know, high on the agenda in California but not so high in St. Louis or in, I don't know, Missouri or somewhere else?
Yeah, having lived in California almost my entire life, I'm definitely in a bubble. But I think where I could answer the question is more the willingness of the corporate executive. So a gentleman who just finished an expert in residence at our college is Bill Weil, and he was the chief sustainability czar first at Google and then at Facebook. And now he's doing an interesting private-public partnership that I want to tell you about. He's going to employees, especially of the bigger companies, and he's saying, what do you think your executives should be supporting in terms of the larger picture, the larger supply chain, the larger economy, the larger sustainability? And he's leveraging the executives of giant companies, much like the Facebooks and Googles he's worked for, to work with government in a way to make sure that new laws are going to work for society and business. I'm very excited about his work.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. I would love to talk to him, so you're going to have to do an introduction there.
I certainly will.
Yeah, but I think that's fascinating, and I think as it gets higher and higher on people's agendas, and you're right, it does make sense. One of the challenges that EMS people, as I speak to them, are telling me now is that whilst the government might be talking about moving stuff out of China, we have to remember that there's $4 trillion worth of manufacturing capacity, and that actually, even if you move assembly, the remainder of the supply chain is still there. So, you know, you can't just pick up one part of a chain and not expect there to be stress on the rest of the chain when you pull it from one place to another. How do you kind of, if you're looking at it from an academic point of view and as a consultant, how do you analyze the supply chain to actually figure out what the environmental impact is? Because my concern sometimes is we move one part and we actually do damage elsewhere. And I think you have to be very thoughtful.
Absolutely. We teach the systems thinking approach. You know, almost every EMS that's larger than, let's say, $50 million in annual sales has a disaster preparedness and recovery plan in place. At least they should. So already they've looked at, from a systemic situation, where their vulnerabilities are in terms of where are they located. Are they in the Midwest where there's tornadoes? Or are they in areas where there's political strife? And so they've already figured out backup manufacturing, supply chains, transportation, way to keep the product flowing through their EMS to customers. So that is existing. All we need to do is do that on a broader scale. And it's phased. So we need to see, where are we most vulnerable? Where can we right now get the partnerships to transfer manufacturing? And we're smart enough. We can do that.
Yeah.
We just have to have the will.
Yeah. And it kind of brings me to one of my very close friends in the supply chain world, Ron Keith, always says, you don't get what you order, you get what you measure. What about the audit process? How does the audit process work? And is that diligent enough to actually measure what people are doing in supply chain in terms of environmental impact?
I have to be quite honest, I have a little bit of cynicism about it. Certainly so many electronics companies have, if they telegraph their visit, everything looks completely different the minute before and the minute after they leave. So I've seen really great companies like Philips do unannounced visits, audits. I think it's, again, we have to go back to that executive who is going to say, you don't pass go unless our workers are verifiably taken care of. You don't pass go until you ensure that third party assessed you have no effluents into rivers. So it's got to be the executives. And I think COVID has been a way to shake up everyone, right? And this is a great time to say, let's not go back, let's go forward.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It has been a shake-up. It's been a time for leaders to really lead. And I've seen some great examples of that. And I've spoken to executives that are very much talking about their group as family and what they're doing to keep everybody sane. And actually, I was talking to one in particular today that actually put a whole new mental health policy in place to ramp that up, because there's a side effect there of people being isolated and that having different impacts. And when your family is a couple of 100,000, there's going to be all kinds of different issues in there to deal with. So I think I do see that willingness. I think the important thing is to make sure the sustainability stays at the top of, or stays near the top of the agenda, as do all those other corporate and social responsibility things. And then, changes can be made, and they should be good for business as well, Pam. That's absolutely important.
That's always been it. Yeah, just if we can reframe what sustainability means forever, no going back, that it means sustainability of business and the planet that the business needs to serve.
Yeah, well, Pam, let's you and I keep shouting about it. Let's talk about it as often as we can and publish as much as we can on that topic. And also with this video, I'll make sure people have got access to your resources so they can come talk to you. But in the meantime, Pam, lovely to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Phil, always.